A little under half a year after Sonic 1 hit the market in June of 1991, development on Sonic 2 began at roughly the same time as when Sega of Japan was getting this fancy new add-on for the Sega Mega Drive, the Sega Mega CD, out the doors. The company knew they had to bring Sonic to this system, and after contemplating enhanced ports of Sonic 1 and possibly Sonic 2, they came to a decision to create an entirely new title that would take full advantage of the expanded hardware capabilities. Seeing as Sonic 1's programmer/producer Yuji Naka and level designer Hirokazu Yasuhara were busy working on Sonic 2 over at Sega Technical Institute in San Francisco, however, it was evident somebody else needed to step in. This person would be nobody else than Aoto Oshima, the character designer of Sonic, who stayed behind in Sega of Japan after the original game had been finished. With Oshima behind the helmet for Sonic CD, it ended up being pretty different from its Mega Drive siblings, which has split many fans on the quality of the game. Some love it, some are more ambivalent towards it, and some dislike it, period. With this retrospective, we're going to be analyzing the game's design in depth and find out where I sit on this wide spectrum of opinions. This video will be part 1, where we primarily focus on the time travel mechanics and the corresponding robot generator quest. The experiences of Sonic 1 and 2 are hard to describe and encompass in a few sentences, but break them down to brass tags and you've got 3 main elements: platforming, speed, and exploration. The core drive behind the gameplay then is mastering the physics and mechanics, as well as memorizing layouts to blaze through the games faster and faster. The stages have multiple branching routes and secrets everywhere with items in them to incentivize exploration, and through this exploration, you could often even find shortcuts or other methods of getting through quicker than normal once you gain the necessary skills. All these things combined make for highly replayable games, and though Sonic 1 suffered from first game syndrome with a lot of experimentation, in Sonic 2 stuff was balanced with one another to such a degree that there was room for a number of varying playstyles throughout, from taking your time with exploring everything to setting record times in stages and the game as a whole. Then we jump over to Sonic CD, and they've clearly prioritized one of these elements, causing another one to fall behind. The story here is pretty basic nonsense as always, but nevertheless that Robotnik has invaded a mysterious planet floating in the sky named Little Planet and is attempting to take it over to serve his evil ways. To achieve that goal, the maniacal doctor has placed machines all over the surface of this otherworldly globe, which poop out hordes of Batniks programmed to reconstruct everything to their boss's wishes. For you as the player, this means you shouldn't only think of rings, extra lives, and power-ups to explore for throughout the adventure, but also the total of 14 robot generators. Yes, Acts 1 and 2 of each of the 7 zones in Sonic CD have a robot generator to look out for, and this is quite the involved task with a lot of potential to be a great addition to the gameplay. The stages, for one thing, are pretty large, yet just the right size. They aren't necessarily long when going from left to right, but they do have much verticality to them, with an abundance of nooks and crannies to investigate. This is nice because it means levels don't overstay their welcome when you just want to get to the end, but can become rather expansive if you do decide to explore them. It's kind of like Sonic 1 and 2 in that regard, but Sonic CD's levels definitely focus much more on exploration as a core element. One of the main reasons for that is that all of the layouts are constructed to be very backtrackable, to accommodate this heavier emphasis on exploration. Sonic 1 and 2 also have a portion of stages that are backtrackable, but I get the impression that was more of a happy accident whenever it was the case. In Sonic CD, on the other hand, each and every stage is indeed fully or at least near fully backtrackable. Even Collision Chaos 2, where I always assumed you cannot go back once you reach this part right before the goal, well, if you continue to build up speed via this slope and then jump off at the right interval, you can nudge yourself towards this pipe on the left and travel all the way back to the start of the act. I think Tidal Tempest 1 has a point of no return around the halfway mark, but the roboticizer lies beyond that anyway, so it's okay. It's a good thing that the developers realized backtrackability was an important aspect of the levels they had to get right, because the robot generators could have been a pain in the ass to find otherwise. Be that as it may, I'm gonna tell you up front that, sadly, despite the promising concept of the robot generators and good backtrackability of the stages, I think the quest is brought down by some poor design choices. To begin with, a select few of these generators are obscure to the point that finding them can completely kill the pace of your playthrough. The first one is in Wacky Workbench 1. See, there's this hole in this crusher thing you have to fall into to be magically transported to a locked off section in the map containing the robot generator, but the visual design really does not hint at a hole in the crusher at all. Conventional Sonic wisdom would have you avoid crushers, so the only way I feel you could possibly figure this out then is by sheer accident or by snooping up the information online nowadays. Debatably even worse though is Metallic Madness 2. This stage is a bloody fucking maze, boasting pipes that transport you to various areas, with some of them being dead ends while others loop you around to earlier sections of the map. Navigation of it all is confusing, and there's really no clue or indication of where what is and leads to, so it's like finding a needle in a haystack. What also doesn't help is that you cannot obliterate robot generators in the present or future, only in the past. This is a whole problematic aspect on its own that I'll dive into in a moment, but Metallic Madness 2 has an extra issue when in the past. This ledge right here, that's a cunt, because you can barely not get on top of it unless you go back to the present. You have to imagine aimlessly stumbling around in the stage, looking around every inch of this perplexing maze for an exit, only to realize you have to go back to the present for some arbitrary reason. To be completely fair, these are the only two instances of outright bad roboticizers I can bring up. Most of these suckers are placed in very reasonable locations, encouraging exploration without being obtuse. Palm Tree Panic, Collision Chaos, Tidal Tempest, Quartz Quadrant, Stardust Speedway. Hunting down the generators in those zones can be pretty fun and satisfying. Here is the first catch though. You cannot revisit stages you have finished, and you have to destroy all the generators in the game for the good ending. This means missing even one of these devices essentially equals missing all of them, and that your ass is locked into a level until you find its robot generator. Not only that, if you do miss a zone's roboticizers, you have no other option than to start over from the very beginning of the game if you want the good ending. This is especially problematic when you consider that the game does not directly teach or inform you about the existence of the robot generators. What? You only realize by the third zone there are robot generators to destroy? Cry some more, bitch boy, back to square one. This is just archaic, especially considering it's 1993 and that Sonic CD has a save system. A lot of contemporaries before, around, and after 1993 allow players to go back to previous levels to obtain stuff they've missed. Sonic CD says bugger that, and it kinda sucks. Now, I've dropped mentions about the past, present, and future just a moment ago, and how the robot generators can only be destroyed in the past. This leads us to what is likely the most defining gimmick of Sonic CD, the time travel. The premise is that for each zone there is the past version where Robotnik had just begun his invasion and started planting his robot generators, the present version where Sonic arrives at Little Planet with Robotnik slowly taking over, and then the future version can be one of two things depending on your actions. A bad future where Robotnik has completely industrialized the environment, and a good future where Robotnik's machinery and influences have been wrecked, creating what seems like a healthy balance between nature itself and human creations. Off the bat, I want to highlight that in terms of shaping an atmosphere, the different time periods add a ton to the overall experience. The bleak states of the bad futures are the ultimate guilt trip that may motivate players to go back and fix all the damage done by the maniacal doctor, while the happiness and peacefulness of the good futures should give players a great sense of reward and fulfillment for going the extra mile and rescuing various areas of Little Planet. Every time period of each zone also sports different color palettes as well as different arrangements of the same composition to fit the mood, which means there's lots of art to marvel at and lots of music to gush about. The presentation of the game is extremely unique, varied, and memorable in that regard thanks to the time travel mechanic, and it's safe to say Sonic CD wouldn't be Sonic CD without it. In terms of gameplay, the time travel also offers good promise. When you find one of the signposts in a level that reads past or future and keep moving at or above a certain momentum threshold for roughly 3.5 seconds, you'll warp between time periods. If you come to a stop or lose a substantial amount of speed over these 3.5 seconds, your Hedgehog ass ain't going nowhere. It's intriguing on paper, and I can see what the developers were going for here, challenging players to learn parts of level layouts and set up a setup to facilitate time travel. This can be pretty difficult in certain scenarios because you're often cramped for space to run around in freely for long enough forcing you to become creative. Here in Metallic Madness 1, for instance, I build enough momentum to hop over this area and activate the sparkly stars, yet control my velocity in such a way that I'm still able to jump and pull back enough as to land in between these two springs. See, I created that setup. I figured that shit out on my own, and thus I can definitely see the beauty of activating these time travel shenanigans. It's also a plus that this example tapped into mastering Sonic's controls and momentum, because a game should always strive to incorporate applications that support and put to use its core mechanics. Unfortunately, I'm only willing to defend the concept because the execution indeed leaves something to be desired. To begin with, there were times I felt I got cheated out of a time travel. You know, I'll be rolling or racing through an automated set piece of some kind, only for it to dick me over at the last possible moment. Here in the Quartz Quadrant Bad Future, for example, I hit a wall just a split second before activating a warp, and here in Stardust Speedway Present, an interfering speed-up device glitched out and caused Sonic to come to a jarring halt, which isn't even a level design issue, but more so one of programming of collision. Another instance of that is how running up the tiniest bit of an incline may kill your time travel. Like, really, why does this not count just because Sonic's sprite was very briefly at an angle? What the fuck is that about? Now, I won't imply this type of nonsense happens all the time. In many cases, a failed time travel was simply me screwing up, and I'm not going to disregard an entire mechanic based on some jank that occurs once every RZ upload. I draw the line though when the consequence for failing a time travel is so damn severe. If you fail to execute a time travel from the moment those sparkly stars appear around Sonic, you lose your ability to time travel altogether. While players should be punished for messing up, it basically equates to a lot of extra scouring through the levels to find a new past or future signpost to earn a second shot at time traveling. Then, once you do stumble upon one of these signposts again and are looking for a suitable place to use it, you constantly have to slow yourself down in order to prevent missing another opportunity at warping. These processes can be a hassle if you're a newcomer and form distracting, pace-breaking clutter around that core challenge of maintaining your momentum long enough to time travel, despite it being interesting in its own vacuum. This clutter and the aforementioned jank can also compound upon one another and frankly open the doors for frustration more than anything else if you ask me. I do have to mention that there are heaps of set pieces in most to all stages that grant you a freebie time travel with zero effort required. Think of two springs close to one another to infinitely bounce back and forth between, or some sort of other stage gimmick you can abuse to gain infinite momentum. This can be considered a good thing since it relieves you of the bullshit otherwise involved with activating a time travel. Simultaneously though, it defeats the point of players learning to maintain their speed and flow in a level and or create their own little setups to achieve that time travel. I would not have minded maybe one very difficult to find set piece for this purpose per level, but it's far from that in reality. Perhaps this was done to capitalize even more on the explorative nature of the game, but couldn't we just add more items to find instead if we needed more incentives for exploration beyond robot generators and time travel posts? I don't know, man, maybe I'm missing something here, but the more I think about this whole time travel mechanic, the more I feel like it wasn't thought about to a proper extent. To give some credit where it is due, dying does keep you in the current time period, so if you do die, you won't have to warp back to the past again from the present when you'd already done that before in the same stage. That's nice. What I also appreciate is that all the time travel signposts can be reset to the state they were in when you last crossed the checkpoint by committing suicide. This makes running out of past or future signposts in any given stage a near impossibility, so if you're in Act 2 of a zone, you don't have to reload your save file and redo Act 1 simply to be able to time travel again in Act 2. The American release of Sonic CD further streamlined this, as you can simply press A while the game is paused there to reset and restart the current act in exchange for an extra life. For that reason, the US version of the game is marginally superior over the Japanese version gameplay-wise. I do wish this feature was actually communicated proper by simple text spelling press A to restart stage or something, but what are you gonna do? When it all comes together though, I'm not the biggest fan of this robot generator stuff and trying to time travel. It's not a terrible quest, and I can definitely see how players who really love exploration and can take some questionable execution would find it entertaining. In its best moments, I even find it pretty enjoyable, and the more experience you have with time traveling and such, the more the jank fades. Getting used to the crap factor though is not a good excuse, and the quest simply falls short of being the truly worthwhile addition it could have been. Outside of creating good futures for all the areas in Little Planet, it's also very much an intrinsically driven quest. Seriously, flowers and a "you're too cool" message as a reward for all your effort? Get the fuck out of here! I don't think anybody would have been opposed to an 8th true final zone with a significantly different, and most importantly better, ending. I'ma drop some suggestions right now on how the quest potentially could have been improved, and though not everybody is going to agree with all of them, I think they're at least interesting food for thought. First of all, the game really should have had the option to revisit all stages already beaten at any time, which I think is self-explanatory. Secondly, I would have incorporated a better sense of direction for where the roboticizers are located. Maybe have areas with suspicious set pieces or visual design that low-key draws people's attention, a sound effect produced by the devices that get softer or louder depending on distance to guide you to the broad areas of interest without entirely giving away the precise locations. It doesn't have to be exactly something like I listed, but in that ballpark, you feel? Furthermore, the time traveling mechanic, that shit needs overhauling. Beyond the wonky collision and sparkly star stuff that could have been smoother and less picky, I'd say get rid of many of the bits of level design catered specifically toward effortless time traveling and give rings an additional function as a type of currency. If players lose the ability to time travel after a goofed up attempt, allow them to gain it back at any past or future signpost by trading in 10, 15, 20 rings, whatever balancing works the best within the game's level design really. This way, there would still be a punishment in place for failure, and while some trekking around would still be involved to the nearest past or future signpost, it would at least substantially cut down on the tedious and time-consuming clutter surrounding the mechanic. Another idea is to make transportation stars appear above the past and future signposts akin to Sonic 2's checkpoints. The maintaining of momentum challenge would be sacrificed altogether here, but the simplicity is arguably worth the trade-off. In that light, also not such a terrifying prospect is one where the time travel mechanics are gone altogether while keeping the atmosphere, graphics, and music of the various time periods. Make Act 1 the past, Act 2 the present, and depending on whether you destroyed all the robot generators or not, Act 3 the bad or good future. Most people barely ever go to either of the two futures anyway, because there's little of any value in them. In fact, the bad futures act more like obstacles to be avoided, since they remove you even further from the past. I actually don't mind that at all, but I also wouldn't lose sleep over it being gone. Anyway, it's also not unreasonable to think that if time travel mechanics had never come to fruition, the stage design in general would have been more polished and fleshed out, since more development time and effort could have been dedicated to that aspect. And if the time travel mechanics were to be fully cut, maybe make each act contain a total of 3 robot generators, or maybe make these useless Metal Sonic holograms actually worth a damn to compensate for the otherwise comparative lack of exploration. To take it even further, don't make the challenge just the process of finding the roboticizers, but also something that incorporates intricate platforming and Sonic's physics into the mix. There are so many examples throughout the classic series of secrets or shortcuts only reachable with clever thinking, mechanical mastery, or sometimes even a combination of the two. Using the speed shoes in Green Hill 2 to gain enough momentum to reach the top of this loop with an extra life, using the speed shoes in Spring Yard 1 for a similar purpose to be able to launch yourself over a wall to skip the slow-moving block section. Now, picture how swell it would be if Sonic CD took this defining aspect of the classic Sonic gameplay and applied that to its level design when it comes to reaching various robot generators. Believe it or not, this is something the game doesn't actually do at all, as it's always merely a matter of searching for the roboticizers. Never does the design do anything with them outside of that. This is an absolute shame, because not only would implementing the physics and perhaps other general platforming challenges act as a method of intuitively teaching players the nuances of the controls and mechanics, it would also make the roboticizers side quest, and thus by extension the level design itself, more eventful and complex. Let's be honest here, that would have made for a hell of a lot more enticing Sonic CD, because you know exactly where this is going. next week though, because this is all the time we got for today. In part 2 of this Sonic CD retrospective, we are going to be analyzing the level design, one of the most controversial aspects of the game. If you would like to see all parts of this review series on Sonic CD right now, you can head over to my Patreon page and gain access to them and all the other perks listed on the page for the price of $1 per full retrospective. There's no monthly charge, so you only pay when the content is actually finished. That said, special shoutouts to all the patrons displayed on screen for supporting the channel, and of course, thank you all for tuning in.